It's Sunday. Man, I've been watching Max Velocity. I always think of his name as Weather Max for some reason, but Max Velocity. He's got to be the best YouTube like weather personality. I'm not sure what it
Well,
is though. Like, there's something about the guy. He's got like it's almost like listening to like a sports broadcast or like not an announcer, but one of the talking heads, the color commentators. He's got that kind of energy, but it's about the weather, so it's actually interesting to me.
it's funny though. There's at least five or six different of those weather channels, and like I think he's either a freshman or a sophomore, and he's definitely going to school to become a meteorologist. Um, but one of the other channels was like calling him out for being too excitable, and then basically like in what you're describing, because he's trying to make it exciting, he ends up overhyping stuff, and then people get like impacted because they're in the areas where he's getting overhyped, and they're, oh, there's going to be a bomb cyclone, and then if it doesn't hit the way he's like hyping it up, then you get a bunch of people who are like um
They think the
hyper
sky's
vigilant.
falling, and they've made a
Right,
run on the
exactly.
grocery
he
stores, and
he's basically exploiting small populations in rural areas and keeping them hyper vigilant if they happen to be paying attention to him. Well, because a lot of them end up doing watching him or Ryan Hall. So it's like if you look at the chats, it is like it's randomly connecting with all these rural people. I think what you're getting at is like he's this oafy looking white kid who's unassuming. He's not threatening, and he like chocolate rains us by putting on a show with his where he does this thing with his voice, and he's clearly not talking in a normal diction, but because he keeps up the show, there's like
I
somebody asked him one time like if his real name was Max, and he's like, of course not. And it's like I think people struggle with the notion of Max Velocity being a character that he created to deliver the news, in the process got way bigger than he expected. And then I think
oh no, he's
like
gonna. It's like the Alex Jones effect.
it is, because then you see him try to like capitalize on it, where then they do the swag, and you're like,
Oh
does
yeah,
anybody
I,
really
I
need like a Max Velocity hat?
I think if I just saw that and I didn't know that it was a weather personality, I would think there was something like automotive performance related.
Max, right? Yeah,
or like
it's
or
like a car a gasoline additive that
yeah,
makes your car
or
go
a weird,
faster and
yeah,
better fuel economy.
or a chip tune or something, or any number of things that would make sense in terms of like, yeah, max velocity. I wonder what that is. But it's definitely not. It's definitely not a weather station. I'm serious though. It's like watching. It's a similar feeling I have when I'm at someone's house and we're watching football or watching a fight. It's like, yeah, I mean, this is interesting in the context of I'm hanging out with one of my friends, and we're like, watching some people engage in like, professional athleticism, which is cool. But on some level, it's like, yeah, like there's only so far that I'm really, you know, invested in this. I don't know anything about any of these athletes. Rarely am I aware of the athlete. I think there's like in the last 5 years, there's like one baseball player that I've casually observed as this person's extremely impressive, and then that's it. I can't think of any athletes right now, like none that really stand out that haven't already been part of the roster. I guess UFC has this weird kind of like cycle of things where occasionally they bring up somebody that kind of vaguely recognize the name because they've got a whole like path from like beginner to the main event, and all that stuff can be found all over YouTube. It's really easy to actually to go back in time and find that stuff. But
So you've nailed on a few things. It's super easy to do that, but it's also easy to do that for basically everybody else,
yeah,
and for video games, and for books, and for magazines, and for pornography. So like all of these things can have that time travel, which makes it even more difficult to decide where to allocate one's attention.
yeah,
And so one of the problems with UFC is like I used to watch it and the cycles got too fast. And the point of the cycle is to get you acquainted with the person and to get you their backstory in a way that's not contrived like WWE. And there's supposed to be like a line between WWE and UFC. Now they're literally owned by the same company. And aside from that, they try. Okay, what ended up happening is they'll like because Dana White killed all the MMA journalism. He's trying to retcon the narrative. But I was there. What happened was they made a deal with ESPN to have a bunch of events, and then COVID hit, and so UFC had to decide like, are we gonna go with the go ahead with all these fucking events, or are we gonna like do like everybody else and bow out? Well, Dana White and his fucking gigantic hard head decides to go ahead with all these COVID events. Granted, they had really good protocols because they kept the infections to a minimum in terms of like, if you're gonna do an event, they had the best protocols possible. So it's like, not to take anything away from the protocol, they just shouldn't have been having these events. The issue was they had to. And so because Dana got away with like minimum COVID infections, he basically came back and was like, fuck you to all you non-believers who thought we couldn't pull it off. Because for all intents and purposes, like they didn't pull it off without any infections because people definitely got infected and some are like still suffering long-term issues. Like I think it's Islam Makhachev has long COVID and he's never been the same. Like he's pulled out of multiple fights specifically because of long COVID. And they try to make it seem like it's not, but that's exactly what it is. And that's where I'm like, knowing knowing how good my health is, having not gotten COVID, I can only imagine how long COVID is affecting regular people, let alone athletes. And so seeing that, but also like I I know we joked about max velocity when you were in town, like so I think we must have at least seen one of his thumbnails, but like I don't know if we watched any videos where I'm here while I was here, which is where I'm like, you must have seen him in your own feed, is from what I can tell. I don't think I introduced him to you as far as I remember, right?
oh no,
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like we're on the cusp of a like when we're both looking at something independently, like we're definitely on the verge of a new zeitgeist era in terms of like Reed Timmer was like on the Weather Channel and doing storm chasing there, and then he started doing independently, got his own little cult following, and it's really a cult following to the point where like every feed they have to be like, "Don't stalk us," like run, like and people still fucking stalk them. We call them storm chaser chasers. Because it's like they're looking at all the storm chaser feeds and trying to piece together where they are, and then they magically show up and they're just like, hey Brandon, and try to like pretend that they just live there. And then it slips that they drove like hours, and it's like, then you don't know, well, not us, but they don't know how crazy these people are if they've decided to drive hours. Cause it's like sometimes it's like a dude and his girlfriend. Sometimes it's like three dudes. Sometimes it's like two dudes. There's always at least one dude there. It's never like only women, which I'm assuming they wish it was always only women, but it's the exact opposite of that. And if anything, there's always like the one woman that's there is like embarrassed because her boyfriend decided to like hop in the car and go chase down this other dude. So it's like she's trying to figure out what's going on. Does she like go stay with her mom or something now? It's like what's happening? Why are we like driving 2 hours, 3 hours to go find this dude who we don't know? And so there's always this random like they've gotten more aggressive about trying to keep people from stalking them, but people still do it in terms of like they don't necessarily hop out of the cars, but it's all you can tell when somebody knows who they're looking at. And that's why it's like if you're looking at one of the storm chasers cars and you like know who that is, that's creepy as fuck. Like they're not that because if you look at their numbers, they're not that ubiquitous yet. So
No.
that's where I'm like, they're on the cusp of being ubiquitous, but they're not there yet. And so the idea that there's already like they this isn't fucking Taylor Swift or Ariana Grande. Like, why are people stalking weathermen? Like, that's fucked up. So
Well, the weather
there's all this
stuff,
whole
I've always assumed that YouTube is sending me suggestions for weather channels because I have multiple weather sites bookmarked in my bookmarks, and Chrome is like the nose, eyes, and ears of Google. And so, of course, they're going to feed all that information back around and represent it to me as something that I might be interested in. Of course I am. I'm interested in the weather. Obviously, I'm interested in the weather. I always talk about the weather. It's like one of the few things that I really enjoy when I'm out in the wild. But that's not the point. The point is like this is really surreal though, because in the past I want to say the last 2 or 3 years I've started noticing more of these loud personality, loud weathermen, loud weather, loud meteorologists, and they're okay. They're just trying to be heard over over the sound of the wind or something, over the sound of the rain, the tornado, whatever they're reporting on. And it's interesting because they're getting like louder and more aggressive. And Weather Max Velocity, I call him Weather Max.
I feel like Weather Max is a good nickname for him.
I'm just gonna call them all Weather Max as an entity, much like the Joker that emerges from insanity. Because like, really, who wants to be the sportscaster of weather forecasting? It's really surreal. It's the kind of thing that I it belongs in Idiocracy. The weather isn't an athletic event that needs to be reported as though you know the team captain just got the ball and now they're running down the field and nobody can catch them. It's not like edge of the seat, white knuckled, like, oh my goodness, look, they're about to score, because there's no score in weather.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's kind of what that I forget the guy's name. He was lambasting Max Velocity for doing just that, or Weather Max for basically making it like this hyped up like Super Bowl, like, oh yeah, the tornado's about to touch down. We got a touchdown. Woo! Tornado. It's F5, it's 165 miles an hour. Everybody, if you're in that area, you need to hunker down, get in your basement now. But we got a touchdown. And then the like alarm, and the lights going off in the background. It's like, no, it totally feels like I've seen how like other podcasters react if they're talking about one thing and they're watching a sports game. It's more he takes more enjoyment in his exclamations than they do seeing their sports teams win in terms of how prepared he is to like let people know. But the way that like it happens is it feels like you're saying it feels gross. It feels very blind to the fact that the people he's talking about are actual humans that are then
Yeah.
gonna like
Like
then they're gonna have the footage of the cleanup and
when like a high pressure cell forms over some high plains region and it drives all the moisture out and the temperature starts dropping really rapidly, like so rapidly that anyone who's outside and doesn't have all their animals inside is actually at risk of like, I think it's what is it, pulmonary edema, getting like moisture condensing into lungs and not being able to get out and resulting in pneumonia like conditions. Like that's not funny. That's like actually a dangerous environmental condition. That's not a touchdown. That's not the kind of thing to be freaking out about. That's like time to be really calm and make sure everyone's on the same page. Because when that shit happens in Texas, their freaking grids go down because they won't spend the money to insulate the pipes at the regulators. Or maybe they've done that by now. Hopefully they've done that by now, and that would be smart. But
oh
that's,
my god, you made me think we need to start like a minority version of storm chasers called storm chasers that like exaggerates the fact that we never actually go to a storm site and are like at the closest on the edge of the town or like
I mean, we can probably access the nearest IP cameras that are just wide open and unsecured because most people literally straight just leave it at whatever the factory settings were. Bless them for allowing us to see what's going on in their security systems.
well, because then exactly because last time I checked, I have not seen a black storm chaser or a Chinese or like a non-white storm chaser. So I'm like, this feels like an opportunity to go into a niche, but also not actually go and storm chase and make that the thing where we're like, yeah, we're storm chasing, and then like looking at computers and shit, and like not actually getting in cars. Oh, we're virtual storm chasers. Oh,
Wait,
you didn't say
we can Flight Simulator 2024 is supposed to
right.
have like deep integration with Bing and Bing Weather.
Exactly.
And so
yeah.
we should be able to fly a plane straight into that stuff. I mean, Microsoft has a whole ass like thorium reactor to power their AI. I'm sure that that's running a giant model of Flight Simulator. If anything, that's really what it's doing. It's just powering their Flight Simulator world engine. All the questions that anyone asks Copilot, that's just like barely scratching the surface of whatever Copilot is, because Copilot is clearly running Flight Simulator. There's just no way that like everyone's distributed GPU power is like, or like, no, I'm sorry, individual GPU power is enough to like run those entire environments. They've got to be doing something like magical on the back end.
Yeah.
Like all the stuff I'm seeing out of 2024, it's like, I don't know. I don't know what the real differences are other than like, wow, this looks like even more realistic than what I remember seeing 4 years ago when the last one was released. And it's like, how?
Well, I okay. It was before I think 2024 even updated. They've just done so many updates to the real time mapping that like I tried to fly. Well, not tried. I tried to navigate from Detroit to Bloomington just based on like how I knew driving up here and just seeing if I could like fly my way south and find my way to Bloomington. And it's like so realistic that you can. And in the process, it's like it starts to feel surreal and like there's like a hyper realism that you're feeling and like knowing that the traffic is somewhat real time. It's like you're not looking at the cars that are on the ground right now, but you're looking at traffic that represents the level of traffic right now on the ground, even though it's not the exact, like, it'd be really, I don't know if it'd be worth it to actually be able to observe in real time and then them have to obscure everything anyway. So you couldn't just like stalk people through that. So it's like, to a degree, it's like the representation of the traffic patterns are better than the actual real time traffic report in a way. Um, but just for the sake of realism, obviously people want the real traffic, so it's like, I get that, but it's already, I think the issue with simulation is your movement in your own physical space. Like if you don't have some sort of chair to go with what you're seeing on screen, there is a level of immersion that's broken, but it's not completely broken. So it's like definitely possible to get close to full immersion without having like a full on, 3D moving chair that like shakes and vibrates with whatever's going on screen. But once you do have the chair and once you do have a fan that like correlates with your speed or whatever, if it's open air, um, it just changes everything. So that's where I'm like, on the one hand, I do think like there is this benefit of like having the large Microsoft running the the simulation as realistic as possible, but that's also where in playing it, it's like, what's the end? What is the end goal of them pushing it any further for people who there's like a lower limit of entry of barrier entry for um the simulator now. It used to be much more expensive to get like access to it, and so it's way cheaper to get access to the simulator now. But also, if you want to get all of the equipment to make it more of a simulation, that barrier of entry is still fairly high. It's not nearly as high as it used to be. So that's where I'm also like, are people interested in that? And that's where I'm not sure. Okay, let me rephrase that. Outside of America, people are definitely interested in it. I'm just not sure that it's like
So to build an
catching on
accurate
here.
737 cockpit simulator, the average construction price is around $40,000. An entry level flight simulator cockpit can run anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000.
Yeah, that's like
Like like
bare
one like
bones.
suitable for like Flight X, where you're actually able to use the simulator that's like I think it's FAA and IATA certified or something like that. But that's like that's not normal. That's like somebody who's training to be an actual pilot. That's the entry level flight
Like
simulator.
the very
Like
lowest.
the absolute lowest grade, like the lowest entry point for somebody who's trying to actually get their pilot's license.
Which realistically, that's not actually that bad.
No, it's
That's
not.
not terrible. But in that context, it's like it, does the culture for these things precede their relevance in society, or do you have to create them and then create the relevance? It feels like it would be the latter, but I don't know if that's necessarily true in that um like arcade culture emerged at a time when games weren't that good.
Yeah.
So like if we I remember when like Daytona USA or Cruising USA or like I think there was like an Indy 500. I don't know if it's an Indy 500 game, but it was like an Indy car game where you actually got in the vehicles and they had the like motion simulators. Some of them didn't have full motion, but it was like I think you could race up to like five at a time, and they had the giant screens. And it's like they may have some still at like Dave and Buster's or whatever, but I don't know if that can emerge without an actual push to have a space where people can go. Even if okay, even if the cheapest simulator was like $1,000 with including the steering wheel and the pedal setup. Like if you brought your own chair and it was like you attached the chair to it and it did all the vibration, all that. This is $1,000. There's still gonna be a shitload of people who aren't gonna put out that extra $1,000 on top of whatever. If it's like a PS5 or a PC or whatever, that's an extra $1,000. It's not just the barrier to entry. Now it's on
Man,
top of the.
I'm looking at this website. It's simsobsession.com. Fact, how much does it cost? And it looks like this person built a full cockpit of a 737, like pilot, co-pilot, and navigator consoles. $65,000. Yeah, like a even has a he even replicates the exterior of the cockpit shell. Has a giant projection screen in front of it. Wow. There it is. It's the price of a reasonably optioned full size truck, or
I mean, you could probably buy a small plane for that. Like, dude.
I'm gonna go to eBay and find out. Single engine plane.
Because I'm like, I don't think it's necessarily the plane.
$20,000.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the planes that are that expensive. It's a matter of you have to have a place to keep it and the
1972
gasoline.
Piper Cherokee 140. No damage. 79.95 free local pickup. I mean, I
It may
think
well, and it may cost like $500 in gasoline every time you fly it, which is like, you know, you can't just like I said, you can't just own a plane, but the actual plane itself, you can you can buy a plane for less than they spent building that fucking simulator.
you can buy
You can buy three planes.
you can buy one plane and
You can buy one plane,
and
just crash it, just crash that one, then go buy two more.
no, you buy one plane and have $40,000 worth of fuel. I wonder how far that'll go in a single engine plane. $40,000 worth of fuel. Now I'm looking for avgas prices. Yeah, let's look.
Well, because planes, I mean, single engine planes get,
eight
I think,
dollars
pretty
and
good
88 cents
mileage.
per gallon is the average at some airport. I don't even. Oh no, national average is 6.52 per gallon. That's for normal gas. For sustainable aviation fuel, it's 8.88 per gallon. So it's like twice the price of driving a car.
Which
But you're
they can travel
flying.
between 400 and 800 miles on a single tank. So yeah, that's like, I mean, the issue being you're not gonna fly to like the grocery store. So all of these flights are gonna be longer than 20 miles, assuming you know, even if you take
Oh
it
no,
up.
I got it. I got it. I know what the use case for this is. I let's say I own property like somewhere in the Upper Peninsula on one of the Great Lakes, and then I also happen to own an island somewhere out in the middle of the Great Lake, and it's easier for me to fly there than it is to get there by boat somehow. Like there's no good place to land a boat, but somehow I can get like a airplane with you know pontoons to land near it or on it. That's a use case. Or maybe I have a property in Alaska, and but to get there I have to fly into the middle of the wilderness, and there's a big body of water that the property is on, but that's the only way to get there is to fly in. So that's like a use case that requires owning multiple pieces of land, in a place where one is inaccessible by any other means. This
Have
is
you ever
a
flown in a seaplane?
I'm no, and I'm sure it sucks. No, and that's the
Is
thing.
that
That's the thing.
no,
Like,
no, hold on. It doesn't suck. It the closest I feel like I've ever come to death in my life. And in all of my days, that riding in a seaplane is like the one time where I was like, oh, this is it. And I've jumped out of a plane. I've
so,
jumped out of a plane on purpose.
so
And
you
like,
had one of those. So this is how it happens moments.
yeah, oh yeah. Because it's like, this is what I realized flying in a seaplane, because it's designed to land on water as well. It doesn't particularly fly smoothly, and it has all of this turbulence because of the like um buoy, whatever the things are on the bottom to keep it, like the skids to like actually keep it buoyant on water, also cause a lot of drag and turbulence. So it's like it doesn't feel like you're flying straight. It just feels like you're just like shaking in every single direction. There was no time where the flight was stable. At no point was the flight stable.
I know, but
And then
that's why my use case situation is so preposterous, because like the idea of well, at least to me, I'm sure somebody fantasizes about owning property out in the middle of nowhere where you have to have an airplane to get to it. I'm sure people fantasize about that. Like, actually, that's not entirely true. I've always dreamed about having some giant uh, watercraft that looks like an island that floats out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in the middle of nowhere. But that's like, mad scientist Bond villain level fantasy. That's not actually like realistic. That's always like a joke. But somebody out there actually fantasizes about owning a plot of land on a body of water out in the middle of Alaska, where the only way to get there is to hop in their single engine plane and fly into the nothing for several hours before they land. Like, people actually do that shit. People spend tens of thousands of dollars to get dropped off in some remote, like, hunting property in Alaska. So I know that like there are plenty of people who do this stuff. I just think it's like I think it's just absurd. Like, not just the kind of skill level that one would be required to have to survive in that kind of environment, but also being alone in that kind of environment. Like, where like getting like a splinter could lead to losing a limb.
yeah,
But people fantasize about that kind of thing.
people fantasize about a lot of things,
That's
and
like
they
the
also
weirdest
don't.
cosplay.
Well, but also like I've come to the conclusion that like even though most people won't get it, physics should be part of getting one's driver's license. Like you should demonstrate a basic understanding of like inertia and momentum, um, and like mass and motion in terms of like you don't have to figure out like if a train leaves from Boston and another train leaves from fucking Philadelphia, like if they meet in another place, how long it took them. I don't think people need to figure that shit out. They need to be able to look at a test where it's multiple weights and multiple different stopping distances, and they need to be able to calculate the stopping distances for those weights
Like
based on the
like what is
given
the terminal
information.
speed differential for a given mass?
Yeah,
Because it's
exactly.
not the same for all vehicles. Like F1 cars, race
Exactly.
cars, things can hit stuff at like really high speeds and the drivers will survive. But if you try to do that in like, I don't know, any Volkswagen, small Volkswagen from the 80s, you're definitely going to get crushed into a tiny little space. And that's physics. Like that, and I completely agree.
Or
It's like
like
the sudden stopping part that needs to be internalized. Not the how fast can we go if we do these things. It's like how fast can it stop and how fast is too fast to survive.
for example, if a vehicle weighs 2,000 pounds, what's the fastest it can go through a 90-degree turn? What's the fastest it can go through a 45-degree bank? Like without potentially losing the grip on the tires. Like that's a physics question.
Yeah.
And when Americans don't have any concept of those things, that's where like I'm hearing accidents now and I'm like, "Oh, you don't respect physics, you don't respect your vehicle, you don't respect the the pavement, you don't respect the weather." And that's where I'm like, I'm hearing accidents differently now in terms of like the impact velocity and how someone impacts their vehicle. It's like it gives me information on how little they know or how little they knew about operating their own
Yeah.
vehicle.
Well, it's also that time of year when temperatures are dropping, and at least, well, I know that you see them too, but when
Not I wasn't just talking about in real life. Sorry, go ahead.
but like so Bloomington is a university town, and so there I see license plates from all over the country. But the ones that I worry about the most are the vehicles that are registered in like, you know, the southern states where it never gets cold. And I wonder if they have like real like if their tires are actually, you know, the right kind of rubber compound for this region. Or like, do they have like a lifetime of driving habits from living in a different climate, and now they're like in Indiana where it's gonna get fucking cold. We might get ice and snow, and so I see these vehicles, and I just get apprehensive. And it's like a weird. I guess it's a strange variation of PTSD from growing up in a college town and seeing a preponderance of incidents where it's either very clearly the locals driving like idiots because they're just out there having fun with their beat up truck, and that's fine, or it's like someone who's never driven in cold climate and they don't realize that once the temperature reaches a certain threshold, the mechanical adhesion properties of the rubber compound of their tires starts to diminish.
Yeah, they're both different kinds of dangerous. And it's like you definitely are right for being wary of those people. Those are the kind that like
You can't
trigger
assume
your
that they
spidey senses.
yeah, and like I can't assume that they have like if I see a license plate from Florida, I'm not going to assume that they know how to drive in the snow.
Right. Or like this is the time of year where you have to like watch your rear view mirror to make sure somebody
Isn't
isn't
Florida?
like
Yeah,
sliding into you,
yeah.
about to slide and like slamming on their brakes and like sideways already. Because that's happened to me before where I'm like,
Oh, I've started hearing it at the intersection because Moffett intersects into Fairfax at a T. I've started hearing cars sliding, and it's this the kind of tire howl. It gets longer and longer as it gets colder and colder because people realize they need to slow down sooner. It's only a matter of time before someone slides into the intersection,
mm-hmm.
and this is like a regular thing. Like every year, someone slides into or through the intersection. Sometimes they're lucky and they just end up in my neighbor's yard, but sometimes they're not. And Actually, the last one I think was the front end got crumpled up so bad that the battery made contact with the hood and was going to catch on fire. So that was actually I think the most intense accident that I've witnessed.
Oh, excuse me. On that note, I had been watching um supercar crashes.
Oh
Like
goodness.
I stumbled upon this genre of Schadenfreude where it's like a lot of them are on the street where I had been watching rally car races and like I've been watching all kinds of races like mini motorbike races with children is fucking hilarious because they're like 8 or 9 and they're like riding these miniature motorcycles and then they crash, but it's like they're not going fast enough to actually cause any damage. So like they just kind of pick somebody comes and helps them pick up their bike and then they just hop back on. So it's like, in contrast to like super high speed, there's this super low speed, low risk. It's still hilarious and fun to watch. Um, but then there's like, you know, endurance races. But
Oh,
then you get into
I
the
just found
crashes.
30 views of crazy kids crashing bikes and carts. It's the kids on mini bikes dressed up like they're in a MotoGP. They're not going very
It's
fast.
amazing, right? It's amazing because they don't actually get hurt, and so it's like it's funny just to see them then like a regular sized person run up and like pick the bike up, and then their tiny little legs run up and try to like get the bike back, and it's just like wholesome fun. So
Oh, that thing's so tiny.
it's hilarious. It's like Mario Kart or some shit. Like I don't know when it started recommending that, but at some point I was like, they look like are these little people or are these kids? But then they're definitely kids just based on like their proportions, and I think it says it in the
It's so what's happening when they're
description.
flipping over is they lean too far in and their pegs touch the ground, and then the rear wheels lift off the ground, and or it does it like a cartwheel. That's what I'm seeing consistently. Wow. Nope, that one just completely lost the wheels because he went into a puddle. Okay. But he just ran up, picked the bike up, and he's
Well,
back up and
but
running.
part of it is like as good as they are, they're still children that still aren't 100% coordinated
Yeah.
and like haven't figured out physics quite yet. And so some of them just go into turns a little too fast or like
Oh,
brake a
man.
little too late.
Here's another one. Right off the starting line, one kid just completely lost it and took out three other riders.
Yeah. Because then it's like some of the crashes they have are totally just like not only some shit a kid would do, is some shit a kid's much more likely to do. But then if you watch racing long enough, an adult's gonna do that shit too eventually, where you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, but when an
Uh,
adult crashes like a soapbox racer, it's like catastrophic. But I'm actually convinced that like the adult size soapbox crash stuff, those vehicles are designed to come apart like that.
oh yeah.
They're supposed to
Oh yeah.
break in the most wild and impossible, unimaginable ways possible, and it makes me wonder like how safe is that to begin with if it can just fall apart like that, like it's made out of Legos. That can't be safe. That's got to be. That's like
Well, I think it's the roll cage that's the most important.
yeah.
As long as there's a roll cage, it's like that's why they make crumple zones, as a matter of fact. So it's like you actually want the exterior of a vehicle to take
Oh no, I
most of
mean
the.
like the soapbox, like the downhill gravity cars that look like spaceships or look like a shopping cart or look like a barbecue
Oh,
grill.
oh, oh! Though I think those just don't go fast enough.
I know, but
Like the fastest ones go like maybe 20 or 30 miles an
yeah,
hour,
I know,
and
but
like
those whenever like I watch those crash videos, like the epic crash of downhill gravity car stuff, it's like the most explosive. They come apart like in ways that make me feel like question whether they were even like bolted together. and it's really surreal. And I think that it's just like there's a variation of the fail video genre that has like made its way into some of these types of like ridiculous adjacent to sporting activities, and so it's like just part of the show. But there's a lot of them, and I didn't realize like I guess I never realized how big adult style soapbox racing was, or I had no idea that like there was this world of miniature kart racers, like where the field is all children. Like I mean, I knew that like it existed, but apparently like
So,
the version that
but
I'm seeing in this fail video, these car crash videos, cart crash now, like this is way more organized than I realized.
they even have like drifting soapboxes for. I've seen them for kids and adults. Now I think about it, like there's no power, but they're set up so the wheels like have positive toe, so they can get out, basically mimic drifting by having the wheels not be in perfect alignment, but it's like in soapbox cars, and they'll have like initial D um soapbox drift derbies.
Oh wow! I
So it's like there's this whole there's a the way that there's all these subcultures in racing and downhill racing and like soapbox racing and shit like that. It's interesting to see it, but that's what led me to like seeing all these basically street racers wrecking their fucking cars because they didn't know how physics worked. And that's where I'm like, it's fun to watch in that usually nobody's dying in these videos because they're making it to YouTube and they don't want to get demonetized, so they don't put like actual death videos or anything like that. So it's not. It's usually just somebody losing $100,000 or $200,000 worth of a vehicle and like walking away from it. So that's why you can sit there and laugh at it for half an hour. Um, but goddamn, if you don't have a supercar, that shit is fun to watch. It's fun to watch people wreck supercars. I didn't think it would be that fun. I want to say it's almost, if not like, okay, watching races is a different kind of fun, but watching supercars wreck because they wreck at such high velocity is like there's something about it. It's like slap fight championship before it stopped being cool.
I think that kind of thing just reminds me that that super high performance vehicles are not toys, and they're
Right.
not for the
Oh yeah, fuck
uninitiated.
yeah.
And like just because somebody has enough money to buy one doesn't mean they have the skill set or the training to operate one safely. Like
Yeah.
I I think that a lot of those vehicles should absolutely be available to the consumer, but I think they should also like require like a special license, or maybe like they only are
Mhm.
allowed on tracks where it's safe to operate a vehicle that can go 140 plus miles an hour, like without sweating.
Right. If you have to have a license to drive a fucking limo or like a commercial vehicle, but you don't have to have a special license to drive a supercar, what the fuck is that?
But you have to have a special license to drive a race car on a racetrack with other racers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Oh
And so
man.
having a track capable vehicle on the road with people who don't have track capable vehicles and also don't have any training for that, that's just a big recipe for disaster. It's even scarier when I think about the future populated largely by electric vehicles that can accelerate to 60 miles an hour in 2.5 seconds. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's like race car numbers from like the 70s. That's still really fast. Like normal. I, I'm afraid of the minivan that can go 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds.
Not none of this shit needs to go that fast.
Like an
Um,
SUV that can go 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds is also unfucking necessary. Oh wow! I just watched a epic or cart crash with a bunch of kids. Vehicles were like riding up the back of other vehicles. This is a pretty bad pileup. I think people are getting hurt in the kart racing stuff. I don't think it's like the mini bikes where they go flying off the track into a field. These kart races look a
so
little bit more painful.
there's a quote from Colin McRae, who was a rally driver, but also like a stunt driver, and he said straight roads are for fast cars, corners are for fast drivers. And once I heard that, I'm like, nothing has ever made more sense about fast driving to me ever. And that's where the notion of like, I get if you're tuning a car and you're actually working on it yourself, and then you want to find out like, oh, is my car the fastest on this straightaway? There's a pride and an ownership to be taken there that is like more about the connection to the vehicle that was worked on. But if somebody's just paying somebody else to tune their shit and then just going on a straightaway, it feels like, to, not to make a pun, it feels like racing drag, in terms of like, you're not actually racing, you're just buying a fucking really fast car and the car is doing all the work. As a driver, a fucking monkey could do, like, you could train a monkey in like 6 months to drive this car
You know, there's a
straight
roller
that
coaster
fast.
in Ferrari World Yas Island in Abu Dhabi where you can get on the Formula Rossa roller coaster, which accelerates to 149 miles per hour. It's a roller coaster. Oh no, stealth travel accelerates at 0 to 80 miles an hour in 1.8 seconds. Max Formula Rossa goes 0 to 150 in 4 seconds. Um, like that seems like it's really fucking fast. Uh, King Ka goes 0 to 128 in 3.5 seconds. Max Force 0 to 178 in 1.8 seconds. These are fucking insane. Like we just need more roller coasters that can scare the bejesus out of people because that'd be a lot safer than everyone going out and getting into cars. 150 miles an hour is incredibly fast too. Like even on a track, like that's just absurd. I guess compared to like those rocket sleds that the United States and NASA tested to get to the moon the first time were pretty absurd too. I wonder how fast those things went.
So
Rocket sleds travel like 537 miles an hour.
on that note, they have, I also saw in my racing hole, they have jetpack racing now, and it was in Dubai as well. But they had a full on fucking jetpack race with like, I think it was like, it was either 6 or 8 people that were, oh, it must have been 8 that were in the original heat, and then that they did like 2 versus 2 for time, and then they did the finals, like they eliminated 2 people and did everybody's like the last 6 race all at once.
Okay,
And
this
it
is
was
this is pretty stupid. Like all the video footage looks like I know what they are, but it looks like a bunch of bees. Like I'm standing in my backyard watching a bunch of bees fly around some and flowers. This is like, I'm sure
Well,
they're
but
having a lot of fun, but
if you watch, it's different on a big screen.
I am on a big screen.
Because like, well, I don't know which one, if it's the same one, but the one I saw, it was like, um, I think they had a drone following them, and so it was like the shots were not far. They did not look small. I don't think except on the points where they were passing the buoys and they were like, or going through a gate, it would like zoom out to show you the distance between the people if there was a big gap or something. So it was
No, I
like,
think I might have just selected a long shot where I'm looking at a bunch of bees flying around in circles. And the drone shots are still these tiny little dots on the screen. I I can't take this seriously. I want it to be. I want it to be. I guess I just expected Jetpack more like the Rocketeer than reality.
I mean, the one that's on the back is way bigger. I
Yeah,
think that's why like the hand ones are the most versatile
yeah.
with the least amount of space needed for the engine or for the turbine or
The battery pack system.
I mean, I think it is electric. And so it's like air, uh, whatever is pushing the air. Like, no, you know what? They said I think they're gas powered because I think they said it was like 5 liters of gas
Huh.
per
Whatever their power supply
per
is, they wear
run.
it on their back.
No, it was definitely gas powered.
Yeah.
Because I just explicitly remember them talking about the 5 liters.
I think that I mean it's cool, but I think there's part of me that's just like I'm not ready for jetpacks to really be giant hair dryers. Like I want the jetpack to be the source of thrust. They should be wearing one of those hair dryer things on their back and doing all this stuff without burning their, legs or something. If that's even possible. I don't know if that's even
I
possible.
mean, the issue
Of
with
course,
the back is
what I
like,
want is based off of like the version of sci-fi that emerged in my mind when I was reading about things like that when I was younger. So I'm also bringing a lot to the table that like I'm probably not even that subliminal type stuff or subconscious type things.
I think the issue with the back also, if the thrust is coming from that direction, is not that it's hard to fly. It's probably much more difficult to land.
Yeah,
And so the way that they can like, it's watching the way that they like adjust. They're basically doing um a planche layout when they're flying. Um and then there was like a couple different techniques that got used. So like instead of flying through the corner, this one dude did like a 360 and just spun around and flew in the other direction. Um so it's like, all right, I guess no, it was a 360 because it was like he kind of like, I was gonna say 180, but he did a full 360 in that. In turning, he used his momentum to then like shift it. It was like he kind of like swung up, and then when his weight came back down, he was facing the right direction. He didn't win, but it was interesting to see people use different techniques in terms of like body weight placement is everything in tandem with the thrust in terms of control. And then you'd see people like spin out of control, or if they weren't flying high enough, fast enough, then they'd end up in the water and shit like that. So it's like there's all these elements of it that then make it so, yeah, they're all basically using the same gear. And so the pilot is the difference. And then seeing the first person that like the first heat that they did was like I think it was like 52 seconds and 49 seconds or no, hold on. It was 52 seconds and 53 seconds with the two people that did it. And by the end, the fastest time was like 39 seconds on that same course. So it was cool to see as people learn the course, see them shave time off of it and like see how they did that, see where they did it. But like it's such a new sport that it's like I was watching it. I don't know if any of these people will ever be superstars, but these people are definitely pioneers doing some shit where I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna catch on, but this definitely feels like I can I feel like for once that I'm watching the future instead of watching some dystopian shit. Even though I know in the back of my mind there's probably if I just look for like 30 seconds, there's probably some dystopian part about it. Like just watching a jetpack race is like the closest thing we've had to some real future shit in a while.
Yeah.
Like the AI F1 race would have been that if it weren't for the fact that the cars all fucking suck.
I think
and they didn't
I think
finish.
it would be beneficial to any activity that involves jetpacks for entertainment to have some like obligatory like, oh yeah, by the way, this is what we actually use this technology for, and to show like search and rescue teams in mountainous regions using them to get, you know, materials or aid to people in hard to reach places, or like how like our Coast Guard uses jetpacks to breach a ship so they can get on board and, you know, render aid. There's a really big air quotes next to that render aid part, but like
But
that stuff is important. Like that's how it's actually used. It's
right,
like what it's developed for. It's not developed to go around a bunch of giant traffic cones in a bay. It's designed to save people.
For sure, but this also I think shows the limitations of the technology in a way that's then understandable. In like when you see somebody flying too close to the water and then they lose their altitude and then they fucking fall in, it's like, oh shit, this isn't something you can just like Tony Stark you and blast your way out of, and like now you're suddenly doing a fucking barrel roll and it was close. Like no, you'll crash.
Can you imagine if Iron Man had those giant, ridiculous like hair dryer things at the end of his hands instead of a nice, tight, small ring on his palm? It wouldn't have worked.
No, it wouldn't have worked at all. Which I think that's where when they're doing these designs, they have those things in mind and they're trying to get as close as possible, but our technology is just at such a limit. Like there's going to be there's not going to need to be an energy advance before anything like that is actually possible.
Hey,
like
there was a guy that wore a wing that had a bunch of little jets on it.
Oh yeah. He I think he flew.
Yeah, the French,
like
the French
40 miles.
Yeah, that jet. It's like a jetpack. It is a jetpack, but it has wings.
But it also has 3 jets on each side or something.
Yeah. That thing's real. That's cool.
Yeah. But he can't take off from the ground, so he had to they
have to
jump out of a plane.
Yeah. They've got to deploy that person like they're like a ordnance.
So this is one of the big differences in terms of like, yeah, that one can go much further and for much longer and much faster, but it can't go from the ground versus those hand jets can go off the ground, but they can't go that high. And so it's like, I mean, okay, let me rephrase that. Because they need so much time to land, you can't reliably go high and have faith that you'll have enough thrust to get back down.
Oh.
So it's like theoretically you could go up to 300 miles, but then you're gonna or 300 feet, but then you're gonna need like a parachute. 300 feet is not enough to
Apparently,
parachute.
Jetman Dubai can take off from a stand from a standing position.
Mm.
And here's video of him hovering. I don't know how far this thing can fly, but I think it's probably limited. But this is also 4 years ago. I know the first one had to be deployed from a plane. I didn't, and this one only has 2 engines per side too. But he has this really weird. Oh, it's like a action cams, but they look like really stupid antenna.
Wait, isn't he dead?
I think
Or
so.
I guess one of them's dead.
Yeah. I think Swiss Jetman? Jetman died. Oh, yeah, it was the French Jetman. Vincent Rafit. Yeah, strapping a wing and a bunch of jets onto your back. That's like got to be in the, you know,
Oh
top
shit!
50 most dangerous jobs.
The thing that we were just describing is how he died.
Oh, the takeoff and landing.
He was trying to do a hover. He tried to hover 800 feet and land at an 800-foot platform. But that's where I'm like, they're like, oh, he didn't deploy his parachute. Like he fucking knew that if it was anything below 800 feet, it's basically not enough for the parachute to deploy and slow you down enough to guarantee that you don't
not with
just
crush flying wing and a bunch of jets.
Exactly. If it was just him, it'd be different. But with all the pack, he would have to like shed the wing and then deploy his parachute, which by then it's probably like more like 600, 500 feet. So it's even less likely.
Well, here's his mind, the video that I'm watching. Like, he deploys his chute at 1,500 meters and then lands safely. 1,500 meters.
Right, but in
that's
the
like
one where he died, it was like
almost.
at 800 feet.
Yeah, that's not enough.
He didn't deploy his chute is what the issue. And that people are like, they don't know why he didn't deploy his chute. And I'm saying he probably knew that he was not going to make it. And if he deployed his chute, it was going to be a life of like paralysis. Like that's the best case scenario. And that's where he probably just decided not to pull it at that point, which is where I'm like,
yeah, he survived the 5,000-foot parachute deployment, but not the 800-foot. Well, that just makes sense because, you know, mass times velocity.
Right, but that's where I think it's like
the decelerating force applied by the parachute has to like have time to equalize or reduce acceleration. Man, why do people do such dumb things? This is an example of a stupid thing. Let's strap a bunch of overblown hair dryers onto a wing and on our backs and try and fly it. You know, at least the person who did the magic carpet ride is like an experienced base jumper and probably knew how to operate a wingsuit and probably had one of those like CO2 charged backup chutes, backup deployment chutes, whatever they are, the safety net. And that person pulled it off. Granted, they weren't carrying 4 robust engines and a fuel tank.
Well, and this is where like when people base jump, the closer they get to the ground when they're doing their jump, like the more they'll initiate the chute. So it's like some of them like full on pull, like have the top of the parachute in their hand when they they go to jump and it's not, they don't even pull from their back necessarily if it's like a really short jump. So it's not the same as somebody who's in a wing rig. So that's where there's all these things about like if you ever skydive, especially if you're not by yourself, you have to like signal when you're doing things so other people don't impact. Like if you pull your parachute and somebody's right behind you, they might impact your parachute and then now both of you are falling. So this is why there's all these elements of like there's a hyper awareness that people don't necessarily think about when you think about somebody who's about to jump out of a plane or jump off a building or something, where you're like, oh, this person's really reckless. When in reality, they have to do so much safety prep to do those things that it's almost like in their hyper preparedness, they've become relaxed. So it appears that they're lax, but in reality, it's because they know that they've double checked and triple checked, and they all like people who jump out of things usually roll their own, like pack their own parachutes. So it's like if you don't know how to pack your parachute, you're not gonna be jumping off of a fucking building. So it's not the person who's doing these things isn't the person who doesn't know how to do those other things that make it possible. And so I think there's this Dunning-Kruger effect in terms of like when you look at certain, not you, when a person, when someone sees a proficient person executing their skill, it looks easy because those people have done a lot of prep. Whereas in reality, like the reason it looks easy is because of the prep and it feels like circular framing, but it's like it's only circular if you don't understand that the preparation is where it starts. Like it all starts in preparation. It's obvious if you know the prep, but that's why the layperson observer I think has a hard time discerning like prodigal people versus people who put in a lot of work and effort. Because then I'm like, this is where I feel like Americans believe that certain things should just come natural or you'll never get them versus like
There's nothing natural about jumping out of an airplane
right.
or off of a cliff. Like people who jumped off of cliffs before parachutes were a thing were crazy, or they were running for their lives and they didn't want to be gutted by their assailants.
Yeah.
And jumping off a cliff was obviously the better option. Not trying to give them a hard time. They already had a hard enough time. Jumping off of high things is not normal though. Cliff diving, I can see how that would emerge because young people are crazy. But yeah, no, there's nothing natural about flying. We can't fly.
Yeah. Which then that's why I, as much as I enjoy the simulation, like I don't know if I would ever cross the line to becoming an actual pilot. Like the RC and the fucking flight simulator it feels like enough for my human brain to overcome my predisposition gravitational limitation. But that's also again it's like when people really want too hard to overcome that, it's like there's a denial of oneself.
I don't have a problem getting in a boat because I know how to swim. But the idea of like flying is you're right. Like I actually totally agree. I enjoy Flight Simulator. I enjoy arcade flying games and space flying games because they're games and they're not real, and it's a dissociation of reality. And I can pretend for a few minutes that I'm in a spaceship flying around it, experiencing G forces that would crush my spine. Like that stuff's great. I love that stuff. I love a good flying game where I get to pretend that I'm the protagonist in some kind of anime, and I can fly this plane in a way that would normally just rip an airframe to pieces.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I can somehow carry more ordnance in one plane than an entire air group can at one time. Somehow I can carry 112 like multi-targeting anti-air slash anti-ground munitions and 150 air-to-air missiles. Like what the? And it's so I love that, but I don't think it's real. Like I enjoy playing games like that on like because if you don't just like crash into the ground like head on, you can like bounce off of the ground and lo and behold you don't die. I'm pretty sure that that's like defined all of our physical limitations right there. You hit the ground in an airplane, you're pretty much cooked. But that stuff's fun.
Yeah.
And that's why it's fun. It's the same reason that driving a racing game and being able to like ride the wall for that last turn across the finish line and just floor it is fun, because we know that the likelihood of that actually working is very low. But in the game it works because, you know, we're the hero of an anime. And the games are kind of designed to make us feel like the hero. And that's fun. I have no illusions though. Like every time I've crashed in like a flight simulator, like a real flight simulator, I always feel like an idiot. It's like, oh man, why was I so heavy-handed? And it's not fun because it's way more serious than, you know, anime flight or anime driving.
Well, and that's okay. On that note, this is where I am. I try to go with my gaming inclinations and get as refined with them as much as possible. And I realize sometimes I'm in like a simulator driving mindset and sometimes I'm in an arcade driving mindset, and
Yeah.
like they're not the same at all.
No.
And just from the outside they would look the same, but that's where the more I get into the simulator driving mindset, the more I appreciate braking, versus like arcade is the exact opposite, where it's like all about like how long can I keep my foot on the floor? Like, can I keep it on the floor the whole time? And it's just two completely different ways of approaching things. But like knowing the mood I'm in to like then properly apply it, it's then easier to not waste my time and like crash cars when I am misappropriating my energy. And that's where I feel like now I'm starting to understand why like you'll see certain types of racers cross over to other types of racing, like rally car racing might cross over into drift, but you won't necessarily see like rally racing crossover with F1, or you might see F1 crossover with IndyCar, but you're not really going to see F1 crossover with NASCAR, but you might see IndyCar crossover with NASCAR. And it's like,
I think Jeff Gordon went from NASCAR to F1.
Right. I mean,
but he's an outlier. That guy can drive anything.
Right. But I mean, in terms of like, there's always going to be those types of people that are like, because then you realize like, oh, people like him, he might have come from midget car racing, which
yeah, I think he's one of those like born with a wheel in his hand and like keys in his heart kind of guys. Like he can drive anything. I've watched videos of him just driving just all sorts of stuff, and it's like like there's I guess, you know, like prodigy driver or a savant driver level type of thing. I think that's what a lot of like the highest level racers really are. Like the world is different, is perceived differently to them. Like they've attained some level of like zen or oneness with the vehicle and the road that's like, we can't perceive that. But
So just as I thought, he started with midget cars
yeah, that's what I
at
mean. Like
age
he can drive
5.
anything. He can drive anything.
But that's because he started at age 5 too.
Yeah,
And so it's like one thing, he may have been born to drive, but he also got the resources to
absolutely.
nourish and nurture that potential in ways where now I see the simulators, and then I see the mini bike races, and there's like a digital and a physical side. Um, but everybody's not getting access. And I feel like this is gonna be where like everybody's not gonna be trying to be in the NFL or NBA. Now you're gonna see a bunch of kids trying to be like sim racers, um, like from the time they're like 5 years old, and they may never want to drive a real car for various reasons, and they may end up racing. And like that's also interesting to see. There's all these sim racers that try to transition to like real racing and to varying degrees of success. Um, but it's also because COVID hit real racing, and everybody in real racing basically had to transition to sim racing briefly. And so because you had all these major racing teams building these gigantic, like insanely realistic simulation setups, suddenly sim racing was like serious. And then you had like actual race car drivers doing sim racing year round because they had no choice. And so that was interesting to see that how COVID briefly made sim racing legit and viable as in terms of like, I don't know if I don't think it would be possible for like the NFL to come in and start playing Madden for a year instead of doing their fucking actual game, you know? Like it wouldn't.
Wait.
People may
Hold on a second.
watch it.
What makes you think that NFL players aren't already playing Madden all the time?
No, they are. They are, and I'm sure people are watching them, but it wouldn't substitute in the way that
Oh
they were
no,
able to come in and substitute for
no.
racing.
So I just found this video called "Building the Fastest Slot Car," and the thumbnail is this dude has strapped a miniature rocket to a slot car, and it's beautiful. It does exactly what you think. The rocket grabs a hold of this car and flies it all around the guy's parking lot, and then it crashes into the building adjacent to the parking lot.
Yeah, so it's funny. I kind of expected that end because I watched one of the types of racing I watched was slot car, and so this guy was basically trying to like he kept increasing the motor size on the slot car to see how much faster it could go, and it was like I think it was Japanese, and like it was like basically let's see how fast we can make this thing. And at the end it just basically flew off the track because it got too fast and the fucking downforce wasn't enough. And so it was funny to see this shit. Like I guess that's the if you just try to push the speed on any vehicle shape, damn near that's the end result is
Yeah.
it's just gonna start flying like
They have to be
almost
engineered as
inevitably.
upside down wings.
Basically.
I watched this video about how an F1 team, I think it was Porsche, they took one of their F1 cars and they took it to Bonneville to see how fast they could make it go, and by the end of it, I mean it was still like F1. It was still met all of the requirements for an F1 car, and it was interesting because normally the land speed cars have really narrow tires, but this one had big wide tires. And by the end of it all, it was like covered in salt. Didn't have a rear wing. They needed to be able to go faster than the downforce would allow it. to re-engineer the whole thing just because they just wanted to prove that they could do it. I guess one of those things, and it's crazy how much actual engineering is involved. Like we can throw power at anything and eventually meet the limits of what that power is actually capable of doing. Because if you can't keep it on the road, then it doesn't matter. But it's just amazing to me what people are actually able to accomplish with these things. And so like watching a tiny little track racer with a rocket on it flying off the track, I mean, to me it's just like, of course that's going to happen. What else would possibly happen? Like the rocket is as big as the car. I think I read about a guy attaching like a Sidewinder to his Oldsmobile and launching it, not being able to stop and flying or crashing
God.
into the side of a mountain. I gotta find that. Oh yeah, the JATO rocket car. It was one of the original Darwin Awards. He supposedly met his death after a spectacular manner after mounting a JATO, a rocket engine used to help heavy aircraft take off. Okay, onto an ordinary automobile. Um, the let's see, solid. He attached it to a Chevy Impala, found a long stretch of road, jumped in, got up to speed, fired the JATO. It was a '67 Impala, and he exceeded 350 miles an hour, and then couldn't stop. He
So
became
that's real.
he
That
became
really
yeah.
happened.
He left the road at one point and traveled,
Whoa.
became airborne for an additional 1.4 miles,
You know what?
impacting a cliff face at the height of 125 feet, leaving a blackened crater 3 feet deep in the rock.
They did this on Mythbusters. I'm pretty sure they did this on Mythbusters. You're reminding me. I'm pretty sure this is because I'm starting to remember how they did the drawings and how they like showed how the guy did it and then how they did their mimicking. But I want to say I saw that like over a decade ago, which is where I'm like, I know I'd heard of it
Yeah, the
before.
MythBusters one says that they reinforced the roof of their vehicle so it wouldn't tear the roof off.
Ah, there we go. There we
Yeah.
go. I knew I wasn't crazy.
No. They've called it a supersized. No, it's the program revisited the story twice, and in 2007 called Supersized Myth. Their rocket exploded on the ramp. They were unable to replicate. They were unable to get close to 300 miles an hour, but they also didn't use a JATO. They substituted model rockets to produce the equivalent 3,000 horsepower for 15 seconds. I think that that's the difference is the rocket motor that they didn't use.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, I want to believe it because it's so absurd that of course something like that would happen. This is why we don't do stuff like that. It's fine if it's wonderful actually if it exists because it's a perfectly good objective lesson as to why not to attach a freaking heavy lift rocket booster onto a car. Because I think that it's important that the culture of like, hey, don't do stupid things be maintained on some level. And if it didn't happen, well, then it's still a good allegory. It almost seems like the kind of thing that should be on like Outer Limits or Twilight Zone. Except in either of those versions, like the car would take off and he wouldn't run into a cliff. He would like the road would turn into like hyperspace and he would end up on a new road, a road to the Twilight Zone or a road in the Outer Limits. Actually, I think that's like the whole premise of Buckaroo Banzai across the 12th dimension.
Oh yeah, that film doesn't get enough play.
Dude, that movie is so funny.
Yeah.
Has so many just creative and funny actors in it too. Freaking RoboCop was in it, and he was great as
Yeah.
not as RoboCop, but as drew Bonsai.
Right. It seems like at one point he was lined up to be Hollywood's next big thing, but it just didn't work out for whatever reason. I mean, okay, let me rephrase that. It didn't work out to make him a household like sex symbol. He never became a sex symbol, even
Peter
though they
Weller.
tried.
Let's see. Got 90 acting credits. He had a good career.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Let's see.
It's not a bad career. It's definitely nothing to like call a failure by any
Oh,
means.
no,
He's definitely had a successful
he was
career.
RoboCop. Like,
Well, the issue being they like fucked up the RoboCop IP
yeah.
by like recasting him and then making low budget films and then making low budget TV shows. And so
Oh, he was in Leviathan. That was like the underwater version of
mm,
Aliens.
yeah, that was good.
Naked Lunch.
He was in a lot of good
He's
movies.
in a bunch of movies. Yeah.
Cronenberg shit. I
Yeah,
think
that Naked Lunch. That's
I
a
feel like
weird
him
movie.
and he's like Kyle MacLachlan to Lynch with Cronenberg. It
Yeah.
feels like.
Yeah. He was on the Star Trek we will not mention, other than it's the one that we don't talk about because it's really fucking weird. He was on Dexter. He was on the Dexter. Yeah, that's cool. 8 episodes of Dexter.
Huh.
He was the voice of Bruce Wayne on the animated Dark Knight Returns Part 1
I
and
did not
Part
know
2.
that.
So he's
But
he's
now that you say that, he does kind of have a Kevin Conroy thing going.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
He was in Star Trek Into Darkness. He's on Sons of Anarchy. Dude, this guy's like got some pretty good credits here. He was in 3 episodes of the MacGyver reboot.
when was that?
That started in 2019 and ended in 2020. Well, he was from 2019 to 2021. I don't know when MacGyver's. I remember not watching it because he like used a firearm in the first episode, and it's like, man, MacGyver doesn't ever actually use the firearm. He sets up a booby trap, and then the booby trap fires the firearm. Don't you guys get it? But yeah, that didn't happen for me, so I didn't watch it. 2016 to 2021. That's not a bad run. 5 years is a good run for a TV show. That's all they need to become syndicated.
Well, I mean, if there was 20 episode seasons, but they probably didn't get 20.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, I guess I don't know if they still need to make 100 to get syndicated anymore, though. So
I don't
yeah,
think they do. I think they only need like 50.
it makes sense. But that's also like it's weird. The benefits of having those episodes is like you get enough to make it feel like you're not missing anything, but then it gets what feels like filler, but properly done. Nothing is filler as long as it makes the universe more real. So that's where like
They have 95 episodes of the MacGyver reboot.
one of the I don't know if you've ever watched Smallville, but like one of the best parts about it is like nobody is unimportant,
Yeah.
but everybody's unimportant because we all know it's eventually about Superman. So like the idea that we're gonna follow all these people for 10 seasons and then somehow all their stories are supposed to be relevant. It ended up working because the show leans into the fact that it's like, yeah, we know why you're here. We know you're here for Superman. So like we'll give you Clark, but everybody else around him is why Clark is the way he is. And it forces you into this like slow roll, slow burn where you're like, I know eventually we're gonna see Superman, but like I don't care how long it takes to get there because that's not why I'm here. And in the process, it makes Smallville feel real in a way that like I don't think the movies like the Kent Farm felt real, but Smallville did not feel like a real place. Like Metropolis felt more real than Smallville did in
Yeah,
the film.
Smallville feels like the place that the Truman Show like has as a backup location.
Exactly. That's exactly what it felt like in the Christopher Reeve films. Like so because then the reason I realize that is happening is because I've been watching Superman and Lois and like they're trying to do this a similar thing, but they're just not doing it well. And so it's this clunky attempt to give everybody meaning, but then in the process, you end up like not liking people because it feels so contrived as to how they're thrown at you as the audience. And you're like, I don't know if I'm meant to like this person or if they're eventually going to become evil. And then half the time they don't become anything and it's just like, oh, this is just a townsperson.
Their character development teams got carried away.
Yeah, it's what it feels like. It's like write as many non-powered characters as possible and try to write storylines about them. Because then, okay, I'm not making this up. We're getting storylines about Lana Lang's ex-husband's new wife's new child, even though they're, I want to say tertiary, but really like quaternary characters at this point. And so it's like, I don't know if you've ever been talking to somebody, like say you used to go to raves with somebody and you see them either in person or online, and you start talking to them and they're like, do you remember so and so? And you're like, no, but they continue anyway, and they're like, well, anyway, so and so's doing like X, Y, and Z, and you're like, but I don't remember this person, so I don't know why we're continuing this conversation, but I guess go ahead. And so there's these tertiary and quaternary conversations where you're like, when you're in them, you're like, I don't know why we're talking about this right now, but you're like, not rude, and you don't want to cut the person off and be like, hey, let's bring it back to a subject that matters to both of us instead of some just random gossip that doesn't actually affect either of us. But because that type of shit is so normalized, it's hard to like pull people out of those patterns. But I feel like it's much worse when the media that is like, I don't want to say being fed to them, but this is like Superman and Lois is the last remnants of the Arrowverse, which basically got shut down because the rest of the TV shows weren't doing well enough, while Superman and Lois they took all the budget and dumped it into this show. And then they were like, oh, it's getting the best. We don't understand why it's getting the best viewership after they dumped all the budget into it. And so once all the rest of the Arrowverse died off, this is the only thing that's left. And so they're like, we're going really hard on the last season and we're going to do things that we've never done before. And then like halfway through, like I said, we're like focusing on these people who are like not even the friends of the main characters. They're like yeah, I guess they're technically friends because Clark Kent used to date Lana, and so being friends with Lana after they dated, he was then friends with her ex-husband. But now that it's like the most I feel like I'm describing reality TV when I'm trying to explain it, just for the sake of that's how convoluted they're making their plots about people who don't matter, but it's not working. And that's where Smallville shit worked because it was like, oh, these two people get in a love triangle. Somebody comes and takes over their body. And now it's like an even more intense love triangle because now you don't know who's actually like attracted or trying to have sex with who. And then you're like, oh, wait, one of these people is like 17, one of them's 18. This is even weirder, but they don't actually have sex, but it's some weird shit. So like the stuff that's happening is like just basic enough to keep your attention. It's just like there's a whole season.
You just reminded me that like Grey's Anatomy has been on the air for like 20 something years, and they've been trying to, if the way the story has been going, they can't decide if they want to end the show or how they're going to end the show, but they keep leading towards this weird quality of finality, but then it gets resurrected in this weird way that makes you wonder what the hell's going on, because now the story's not even about the person who's the hospital's named after, like that kind of stuff. It's gone in this really strange direction, and I can't follow it anymore other than get really annoyed by characters. And not just new characters, but like the ones that I don't recognize and know nothing about, that are all behaving in a way that would probably have prevented them from pursuing a career as physicians. But even the old characters have been around for like the last decade. It's almost like I don't recognize them either. Like their character teams are all new, and none of them know who they're writing about. And it's really surreal because here's a show that I've watched, many, many hours of, and it feels completely foreign to me now. I think that's where stories go to die. They run out of ways to make people important, so they try too hard. And then
that's definitely it. And there's like an art to it where I realized it like 5 seasons deep in Smallville. I had forgot, like they had focused on Clark and Lana for so long that I'm like, oh fuck, I forget that. Like I had forgotten that Clark ends up with Lois, even though Lois had been introduced by then. It's like she comes in and becomes this like background character to then build the romantic arc that emerges between Lois and Clark. But it's all in the background of Clark and Lana, to the point where by the end you're really rooting for Clark and Lana to like win, even though it's not gonna like emerge. But it's like there's like a whole season dedicated to Lana while she's still in high school, dating one of the football coaches, covering up the relationship, and then the relationship gets found out, and she tries to like reconcile that, and then we find out the dude is like an evil plant. And so there's all these things about it where you're like, in 2024, you're like, who would write this as a plot that wasn't on like the TV show Euphoria or whatever, where it's like about high school degeneracy? But this was just like a normal ass, I think, CW plot. Like this is for teenagers. This isn't for like adults romanticizing about their days as a teenager. This is actually for teenagers. And they're like having this senior in high school date the football coach or one of the football coaches. Cause that's what I'm like, it was shocking that they spent so much time on it in retrospect. But now I'm like, also knowing what was going on in real life with Allison Mack, it's like, were they planting these stories to like make people feel a certain type of way about these types of things? Because then it's like Kristen Crook was part of that too. The only reason she didn't go to prison like Allison Mack is because she basically came out first and was like, "Oh shit, they got me in a cult. I'm gonna tell on everybody. Like, I feel terrible. Like, I think the issue was she actually exhibited remorse, whereas Allison Mack was so deep in the cult that like I think she didn't. At first, she was like not exhibiting remorse. She was making it seem like it was her like right to exploit people and like do all the things she did, and she just like was not showing any form of remorse, and that's why they basically never went after Kristen the way they did after Allison in real life. Um, but that's a whole layer of like
Man, that's like the most
weird
esoteric
baggage.
stuff. Like,
Yeah, oh yeah, no, it's super esoteric. It's very esoteric in that, especially like you think like, no, I'm just imagining this, and then they'll do a storyline where you're like, wait, what the fuck is this? Like, what is happening here? Where you're like, this is not porn, but this is like the closest thing possible that they could have made to pornography without it actually being pornography. It's like if they made a softcore porn and then just took out all the actual sex scenes. It's like those are some of the episodes where you're like, who okayed this? Who, like, I understand the idea that this, like, oh, if we did this, it would sell. But the fact that they actually did it and they like went ahead and went through it, where I'm like, poor Tom Welling. Poor Tom Welling. I can only imagine, like, after a while, it had to make him feel weird to be like, oh, now I got to make out with this person this week, and we got to like really, we're going to second base on camera for a show for teenagers, and they're going to edit it down so that the second base gets cut out. But I definitely have to go to second base with this person.
holy crap,
Like,
2001 to 2017?
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. It ran for a long
Oh.
time. Meanwhile, the motherfucker was like, I think he was like 24 years old when they introduced the show. So you have, this is why it's fucked up, because you have like 24-year-olds pretending to be high school freshmen so that you can put them in these situations and record it and not make it and not have it be illegal. So that's why it's like by season 4, this motherfucker's still 18. Still fucking 18. So it's like, it's okay legally the situations they're putting him in, because he's like, by then he's like 20, he's a 20-year-old man in real life. But senior in high school Clark Kent, who's done a whole lot of shit by then, is supposed to be 18. So that's where, I mean, you know, legally he's an adult at that point, but by then he's already done so much shit where you're like, the stuff that they're making.
So he was like 40 years old when the show ended?
Damn near. I think he must have been like 30.
So wait, he was like a high school student for 16 years?
No. They got him out of high school after like 4, like they only did 4 years in high school, like a high school, but he was 24 when he started. So yeah, I think it was like 20, again, he's like 24 or something. So by the time this character ends high school, this man in real life is 28 years old. It was the same shit with Dawson's Creek when they had James Vanderbeek playing a high schooler when he was like 28 or some shit like that. So it's these situations where they take actual adults and have them pretend to be high schoolers so that the scenarios they put them in are not actually illegal. But if you examine the storylines, it's like, what the fuck? But that's also why, as an adult, it's like, it's not on the air anymore. It's not like actually being targeted at kids. So like, I'm not, like, when I watch it and like can laugh at it, it's because I know it's no longer potentially sexualizing young minds and like hypersexualizing people in ways that it definitely did, like what's it called? That show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like that show definitely hypersexualized a bunch of kids and got them like looking at things in sexual manners that they would not necessarily have done if somebody had not prodded them with these like lightly masked storylines. So that's where I'm like, this this feels like one of those conspiracies that like flew under the radar in terms of like, oh, retroactively, like, oh, duh, it looks obvious. But nobody's really making that type of connection in terms of like were the writers on Smallville making it easier for Allison Mack to go out and find people? Like, yeah, probably. And how much of that was like at her prodding? And it's like, until somebody goes and examines that, we may never know. And it may not have happened, but that's where I'm like, I doubt there's no connection there. Which again, that to me, it feels like all of these stories where you get like a fat, unattractive man who's able to pull like the most attractive woman in media at the moment in any given movie. It's like, well, that has to be coming from somewhere. There's like some contrived movement to make it like so that we see a bunch of Peter Griffins and fucking Kevin James and like Homer Simpsons and then Jonah Hills and like all these goofy ass, overweight, unapologetic white dudes who somehow can like charisma their way into like Scarlett Johansson or Taylor Swift or whoever they've decided is the white woman du jour. And so like
I think the Peter Lois connection is pretty solid. That's
I mean, but it's not because fucking
no.
Meg
I mean,
is,
in terms of what you're trying to identify, I think that's that's right on the money in terms of identifying the weird dynamic that doesn't quite make sense.
well, what I was gonna say is the way their relationship makes more sense once you realize Meg might not be Peter's as they wrote the story.
Yeah.
So like that's also like, oh, that makes more sense now. Like, oh, one of the kids probably isn't his. Like, okay, now I get it. And so once it took like 16 years for that part to come out, but then you get 16 years of a bunch of fat white dudes thinking that they can just like be a dick and not even be necessarily that endearing and still end up getting somebody like Lois who's gonna ride or die for them and like keep herself in shape while he's not. So it's like that story where you're like, oh, white men, you guys can let yourselves go and your wives will keep themselves together for you and like go above and beyond to make you happy. Like, there's a reason white dudes think like that, and it's because the media had been like telling them that shit for basically ever. So I don't necessarily blame them for like have growing up with those expectations and like when they're not fulfilled being upset about it because that's what media's been telling them. And so when they start to get inundated with media that's not centering them, that's not like, oh, you can be white man and be mediocre and you're still gonna pull like a 10, like when shit isn't saying that, suddenly they're like, oh shit, wait, go back to saying that other thing to make me feel better. And so that I feel like that's what's happening now, which is where like you're seeing a lot more dudes feel like they're like the right wing guys. They're making it seem like suddenly media is speaking to them more, when in reality it's just like, oh, they're just putting more boobs on things now. That's all it is like it just takes boobs with them. That's really all it takes.
I just did a search for more boobs on things. When I hit images, it's like fruits, buildings, vehicles. It's weird. Like, hold on, let me change to breasts. Now it's all chicken.
No, because I don't know if you remember when like AI first sort of like emerged as this tool that people had access to. It was like just more boobs on things, and then like amalgamations of parts that weren't even whole human beings, but like two sets of boobs and ass and maybe a head if the person making the prompt was like thinking about it.
Yeah,
Like,
early it was all like weird Cronenberg and John
yeah, but
Carpenter like
it was
just
definitely some Cronenberg shit, but all boobs.
Oh man, is that the AI world that we ended up with? I mean, I know it's
Basically,
gotten better. I know that like Stable Diffusion is on version 3.5 now, I think, and they figured out how to do hands, and they don't do super elongated necks anymore. But I haven't looked at any of that stuff because I was just completely put off by all of the safe tensors and LoRa's basically being designed to generate anime and
mm-hmm,
hentai and titties,
mm-hmm.
and
Yep, it's annoying.
like
I
that.
never thought I'd be annoyed by boobs, but because they're not real, they're super annoying.
Yeah, there's something that's inherent, like because an AI just doesn't actually know what it's doing and just tries like, hey, is this what you want? And it does it enough in times that eventually it gets somewhere on the target close enough that we say finally that's enough, that's good, we'll just move on from here. Like none of it's real, and that's the thing that I still haven't gotten around, and I'm still like, you know, occasionally I see some story about some software that says, "Oh yeah, we can use AI to do these things." And then go look into it, and it's like, yeah, they also just scraped the entire open internet, which means they stole everything. I don't know if AI or the AI companies are ever going to get away from the specter of, the venture capital embezzling or laundering money. I mean, other than a more complex version of Google search, what am I actually getting here? A more complex version of Bing or more complex version of Cortana. Like, what are we even getting in line for?
Yeah, and that's what the scary part is in terms of like I still have not really heard one actual positive benefit for humankind, and it's all thus far been like, oh, the corporation, and that's what's frustrating me about the hype around the technology is like it totally also feels like that's astroturfed and it's not coming from a real place, but there's just enough dumb Elon and dumb AI fanboys out there just to make it just feel organic enough.
It all sounds like we want this thing real bad. What does it do? We don't know, but we really want it. Well, what is it going to be used for? We haven't figured that out yet, but we're going to use it for something. Well, why? Well, just can't you just tell me when it's ready? Well, we need money to make it ready.
We need $7 trillion.
$7 trillion and 36 new chip fabs, and it's going to require 18 Google plexes of water a day. Ugh.
Man, I wish everybody did the Taiwan method and like laughed at him.